So, ladies and gentlemen, when the WHA came into the NHL in the 79-80 season, the higher-ups in the NHL wanted to be fair to the squads, to give them a little bit of time to get acclimated to the new league. They were allowed to bring over so many players. But unfortunately, the playoff format that year was a bizarre configuration of events. 16 teams made the postseason out of 21 teams in the league. Now, this playoff tournament started on April 8th after conclusion of the campaign. The season saw the addition of 4 squads from the WHA, which is disbanded as expansion franchises, and thus the playoffs were also expanded from 12 to 16 teams. Now, this was 1 against 16, not like the conference and the league divisional format we had later on in the year. The expanded playoff format allowed 2 of these former WHA squads, the Oilers and the Hartford Whalers, to make the postseason their first season in the NHL. The Atlanta Flames played their final playoff games before moving to Calgary after the campaign. The playoffs would eventually return to Atlanta some 27 years later when expansion Thrashers made their first postseason appearance. Now, because of the seeding situation, it was kind of bizarre. It was based on points. Montreal played Hartford first round. Now, they should have played Pittsburgh, but Pittsburgh had 30 victories. And ironically, ladies and gentlemen, Toronto at 75 points, LA at 74, and Vancouver at 70 could have been an opponent. Ironically, a Gretzky-led team finished with 69 points. Now, Montreal won the North Division. Now, in the first round, which was a kind of interesting configuration, Montreal scored 18 goals in that set to dominate the Whalers. But here it got freaky. Guy Lafleur got injured. Pat Boutet hit him, I think it was in game 3. And that was it for Lafleur the rest of the playoffs. And of course, that year they had Denis Haron and Michel Larocque and Richard Sevigny sharing duties. Now, the first game was obviously all Montreal. They won 6-1 at home. Lambert, Englum, Chartrand, Lafleur, Lambert with his second, and Steve Shutt in the power play scored for the victors, while Mark Howe had a counter for Hartford. Now, in the second game, Montreal got himself out to a 3-0 lead. The next night, Jarvis Oulin Lambert with his third. Gaston Gingras scored to make it 4-0. Then Ray Neufeld scored in the second period. Now in the second period. Now in the second, Gingras, Gainey, Lambert with his fourth, Steve Shutt and Guy Lafleur scored again before Lafleur was injured. Now Marty Howe and Gordie Howe rounded up the scoring in the third period. Of course, Gordie Howe with a very impressive backhand from half the way to the blue line. Haron made 23 saves on 27 shots. Now, game 3, back in Hartford, Lafleur did score at 12-17 at the first to tie it, with Lambert getting his 5th to tie it in the second period. Houle put Montreal to 3-2, and Lambert, his 6th of the postseason in 3 games, made a difference, but Michel Larocque was given a rest in his contests. Now, we thought to ourselves, hey, Montreal might have an easy go in the first round. No, we didn't. The Bobby Smith, Steve Payne, and Al McAdam led Stars blanked Montreal with 3 goals in the third period. Kent Eric Anderson, Steve Payne, and Al McAdam gave the shutout to Gilles Melange. Now, in game 2, also at the Forum, the Canadiens didn't show up. The only person who could score for Montreal was Lambert, who made it 2-1 in the second period. Tom McCarthy, Payne twice, and Kurt Giles led it, and Denis Gilles Melange stood on his head. But going back to Minnesota, it was all Montreal. Norm Dupont, the first of his career in the playoffs, scored at 12:49, but then Jarvis scored twice. Langley and Pierre LaRouche, who was brought in because Lafleur was injured, took the victory. Larocque stocking 25 of 25 for the blank. Now, game 4, again, it was all Montreal. Reginald Houle, Steve Shutt, Houle again, Lambert with his 8th, and Rod Langway scored for the victors, with Steve Christophe breaking the blank in the third period. So you're saying to yourself, hey, they're going back to Montreal, and they're going to wrap it up, and that's what happened in game 3. But if this was the best of 5, they were the better team would have won. Now, Steve Christophe tied it 1-1, but Steve Shutt and Mondeau scored in the first, followed by Shutt again, Jarvis, Englum, and Shutt finished off the hat-trick at 15:07 for a convincing 6-2 lead. Now, the game wasn't as close as the second period indicated. Montreal was full marks in the third period. Now, Michel Larocque was hot again, stopping 29 and 30 at 31. So you're saying to yourself, hey, they're going to go back to Montreal. They're going to do well. But Larocque had a terrible game. Montreal led 1-0 at the first, but Larocque, he just lost it in the third period. He gave up 5 goals over 14 minutes by Christophe, Ken-Eric Anderson, Paul Schmier, Bobby Smith, he's only his first in the postseason, and Glenn Sharpley. Now, Michel Larocque again had a terrible game. So the question was, we're going to start Larocque in Game 7. But what really stood out for a lot of people, Napier again stuck Montreal to an early 1-0 lead. But Haron, a bad play in front of his net, allowed, of all people, Tung Younghands to score on a shorthand while Montreal's on a power play. If he would have scored, he would have up 2-1, but it was just a terrible movement by Haron in front of the net. Now, Hartford made it 2-1 in the second period. Ron Langley tied it up, but that longtime Montreal Canadiens fan, Al McAdam, with his 6th in the postseason, put Montreal away with a minute and 26 left on a feeding play from Payne and Smith, one of the biggest goals in Minnesota history. But Jill Malash was the key. He stood on his head for most of the contests. Now you're saying to yourself, how in the hell did Montreal lose to Minnesota? Well, obvious reason. Guy Lafleur was injured. They had no number one goalie. Larocque, Haron, and Sevigny were only good for 25, 30 games. But it's a weird part about this, ladies and gentlemen. If you watch that first round by Montreal, scoring all those goals against Hartford, and only scoring 1 goal in the first 2 games at home. But Meloche, again, a good francophone goalie can beat a big Montreal Canadiens team at any time. But not having Guy Lafleur there, and Schutt was kind of, And don't forget, Jean Clemere was gone in the off season. He went to Switzerland to play, and Guy Lafleur said the biggest thing was when Dryden retired. So if you want to watch Game 7, one of Danny Galvin's last great calls was when 1980, I think, was kind of tired announcing Montreal, because I think Bob Cole had took over by 1984. So it was one of Danny Galvin's last calls. But Denny Haron was such a sieve in Pittsburgh. So to bring him into, and he went back to Pittsburgh later on, to bring him in to play in the playoffs in front of people he never played before. No disrespect. They had a chance to get Don Edwards. Bob Sauvé would have been good. So why in the name of God would you think Denny Haron was going to solve any problems? You're better off having Sevigny or... and I don't know the last time. Can you name me the last time that a team had 3 francophone goalies, like pure Quebecois, play on the team? It doesn't happen very often. You get, 2 players, but having... And the Sevigny and Haron, of course, helped with the Vezina later on. Of course, Larocque eventually left Montreal to go with Toronto, but it's another story. So that's the story of Montreal's run in the very bizarre 1970-80 playoffs. If you like what you're doing here with our NHL Tribute podcast, let us know with a like, comment, subscribe, or share.